Hi, I'm James Shillinglaw for Insider Travel Report, and I'm here with a very familiar face, Mark Conroy, who retired, shall we say, from Silversea, I believe, last year. A year ago, April. And we've wanted to sit down for some time to kind of do a retrospective of his career and also all the changes he's seen in cruising over his many years in the business. Mark, you're kind of like the person who's been everywhere. We're going to talk to you about that and more on Insider Travel Report. Mark, first of all, great to see you. We're at Seatrade, so you're still hanging around here and doing stuff?
Sure. I'm. The great news is I'm not commuting anymore, but I still want to stay involved in the business. I've been at it for 52 years, almost 53 now.
And what are you doing now?
Some consulting for individual both travel companies and cruise lines, trying to help them solve little problems or big problems in some cases.
Right. Yeah. So now your most recent position was with Silversea, right?
Right. I was managing director of the Americas. So I ran revenue, past guest services and everything for North and South America and, of course, Canada.
Yeah. So take us back. How did you get in the business? And I know the story a little bit, but tell us, how did you get in the business first?
Well, I went to the University of Miami to school. I wanted to be a football player. And in those days, we had a freshman team and we had shared scholarships. So I had an academic scholarship for half. So I got a football scholarship for the other half. And I wasn't big or fast. So I only played the first 2 years. And then I needed a job. And there was, the cruise industry was just kind of getting started in 73, or actually Carnival and NCL split. So NCL was hiring people, and I got a job on the pier, working the weekends.
So you were loading the ships then?
No. What happened was that we would help people go through customs in the morning, because people would party the night before and forget their luggage and things like that, or not claim their luggage and just walk away. And so we would gather it all together and clear it through customs, and then when the people came to pick it up, we'd give it back to them. And in the afternoon, we give out visitor passes and sold baggage insurance.
Wow. And so you were at NCL. Where did you go next?
I was at NCL. I started part-time, and then I worked at night when I went to school. I worked from school from 8 to noon and worked from 1 to 8. And when I graduated from Miami, I got accepted to law school, but I got an offer from NCL to work in the incentive department. And actually, my tuition at University of Miami Law School was $15,000 a year. And that was going to be my first annual salary with NCL. So I said, I'm going to work for a year, tired of being poor, and I never left.
You never left. So how long were you with NCL, and what did you?
From 83 till 73 to 82.
Wow, so that's a long time.
Long time. I ran reservations. I ran revenue management, customer, anything they could get me to do that nobody else wanted to do.
And then after that, where did you go? I believe it was Renaissance, right?
No, I got recruited to go work for Royal Viking Line. A guy named Jim Barrier called me and asked me if I'd be willing to go out and talk to him about sales. And so I got out there, and Jim was smart. He had one of the ships in San Francisco that day. And I got to get, and I'd been in the Caribbean, we had nice product, but, we didn't have the stain, there was just silver and all that beautiful food and beautiful ships. Right. And so I got, hook, line, and sinker. There you go. And I took a demotion. I went from being a director at NCL to a manager at Royal Viking Line. And of course, we were just stretching the ships. And I ended up leaving there after 5 years, almost 6, as VP of sales. Working for Tor Hagen, actually, for part of it.
Well, that's the thing, is you worked for Tor. I remember going on a tour of when you were with Regent, or maybe it was Radisson back then, and you took us on a tour of one of your ships outside of Rome at a Virtuoso Symposium, and Tor was with us.
Yeah, Tor had some amazing ideas. We were a little ahead of our time, and we actually did a private equity deal. We were going to buy the ships out. And the deal kind of dragged, and then Knut Kloster came in and bought it out from under us. Wow. And I stayed, and Tor left, of course. And of course,
Tor then went on to name his whole line Viking.
Exactly. Interesting story, interesting man. Brilliant guy, not only an MBA, but he's got, I think, his degree.
Physics.
Physics, nuclear physics.
Nuclear physics. Well, that's what the cruise industry really needs.
Exactly.
So anyway, Royal Viking, that was at an end. And where did you go next?
So I got recruited. I'd done a project at NCL for this banker named Jens Moe, and he helped us recategorize the Norway, because I was in charge of inventory at the time. And I did a nice job for him, and he got a nice fee for it. And he called me one day, and he said, Mark, I'm working for the Bank of Finland, and they've got a problem. They own Commodore Cruise Line, and it's not doing very well. So I said, well, you want me to recommend somebody? He said, no, we want you. And I said, well, I got a business degree, but I'm really more of a sales and marketing guy. He says, they're owned by a bank. They don't need guys to count money. They need people to make money. So I got the job there, and I went back as my first president's job, actually.
And how long were you there?
I was there a year. We sold the company. We turned it around, sold it to Royal Admiral Cruises at the time. It was, the older Admiral ships and Royal ships. We sold it to them, and then that's when I left and went to Renaissance.
Yeah, and that was a big thing. Now, who was in charge of Renaissance back then?
Well, it was owned by a company called Fernley and Agar, and what happened was they were the ship operating company, and it was actually owned by Exploration Cruise Lines, and Augie Bush was financing it because he wanted to get in the cruise business. And then halfway into it, he changed his mind and didn't want, his board, I don't think, wanted him to be involved in it. So now Fernley and Agar had these 8 ships ordered with no brand.
Those are the famous R ships that we know.
The little
today.
ones, the 100 passenger ships. Yeah. And they had ships that were coming out, the first one in less than a year, and had no brand, no marketing plan. So myself and a guy named Dave Gaventhor, who you probably
know Dave, yeah.
And we put together a team, and then within 3 or 4 months, we named Renaissance. We set up the business plan and launched it. And we're doing okay, although we had, I think the TWA hijacking happened. We had a lot of stuff.
Little things going on.
Little things that happened. Europe stopped traveling for a while. But anyway, what happened to us, though, was Fernley and Agar got in trouble, the management owning company, and they had my advanced deposits. So I had ships that were doing pretty well, but I had no money because they were holding it. So I had to negotiate with the banks in order to sell it. And I helped put together the group that sold it to Ed Rudner and his team.
Right, Ed Rudner and then Frank Del Rio, right?
Right. Well, actually, what happened was I worked for a year, and I had a year to stay, and I stayed. And when I left, I went to Radisson Diamond Cruises, and Frank came in and took my spot.
Oh, okay. So he replaced you.
Yeah,
Amazing.
Replaced me.
This is like a name game around it.
Exactly.
It's like this. So you end up going to Radisson at the time, and this is working for the Carlson family, right?
Yeah, so I worked I reported directly actually to the president of the Radisson Hotels, John, and also a guy named Jay Witzel.
Okay, I know Jay Witzel.
Yeah, and then and of course Kurt was there all the time, and he'd say, "How are we doing today?" And so if we weren't
You
doing.
went to those meetings, right?
Well, in the beginning, they wanted us to move to Minnesota, and I said my wife wouldn't move it, so I couldn't afford a new one. So we decided they let me open up we had a res center in Omaha, which was great actually, but then we opened a small office in Fort Lauderdale and grew the brand. And
so first you were Radisson, and then you bought Seven Seas, or you merged.
What happened was they had what happened. Stein Cruz and I, he was trying to grow Seven Seas. I was trying to grow Radisson, and we kept bumping into each other. We actually had a joint meeting together with Silver Sea to see if we could work together, and it didn't work out. So Stein and I looked at each other. So why don't we get together? So we merged Seven Seas to Radisson, became Radisson Seven Seas. Carlson owned the majority of it because they had a bigger ship and more revenue. And then I became president, and he became chief operating officer. Right, and then he was smart. He went back to K-Line. He went to work for K-Line and ran K-Line USA for a long time, and of course ended up going to Holland America Line. And I stayed. So.
And you stayed, but you also changed the brand. You acquired the Regent brand, and I still remember the time where you were also operating the Regent hotels here in the Florida.
One here in Miami Beach, it was one of those owner hotels that was a small hotel that was like being the head of the biggest condo board you've ever had. So, but anyway, we Carlson Curtis Nelson had bought the Regent brand from Four Seasons because they weren't using it, and he got a pretty good deal on it. So we wanted to use that brand because Radisson was a good brand, but the trouble with Radisson, they were franchised hotels, so your Radisson experience was pretty much based on whoever the owner that the hotel wanted to run it within standards, of course. But it wasn't luxury.
No, it wasn't luxury, and you were definitely a luxury line.
So we had built a luxury product. Christian Salo came in and really helped me add a nice operation to it, and we had V-Ships helping us do the technical operations, and when we changed that name to Regent Seven Seas, the business just took off.
Yeah, well, we would say as journalists, we look at it and say, Radisson just doesn't say luxury, Regent does, and that was a great move. And you end up getting brand new ships and a lot of new tonnage coming in, and that's when, as I still think that's the one where it became part of the luxury sphere in cruising.
Yeah, we always had the physical plant was luxurious, although a little strange. The Diamond being a catamaran, Song of Flower being a converted Arctic ship.
You had a very different fleet.
Yeah, and of course, then the Navigator came out, and we built it in less than a year and converted a Russian spy ship. And but it turned out to be, even though it was probably the most popular ships of all of our ships. It wasn't the fanciest, but it was really solid. And again, small at less than 500 passengers. The customers they loved it.
Yeah, well, that was just amazing. I remember sitting with you once, and you wanted to take me down to Genoa to see one of your new ships being the keel laying or whatever. But I was at a Virtuoso meeting, and I love you dearly, Mark. But going 6-hour round trip to Genoa at that day, I decided not to do that. In retrospect, I wish I had.
Yeah, I was doing it once a month. It was amazing, but it turned out to be great. But at the end of the day, it was about the team we put together. Right. We had the right people in the right place, all on the bus, all pulling in the same direction, and it really helped. And of course, Carlson, when 9/11 happened, we could have been wiped out like Renaissance was, but we were able to survive because Carlson backed us. And of course, they did well because when they sold the company, they sold it for $1.3 billion. So
they sold, and then what happened?
Well, we got acquired by private equity, and they had already acquired Oceania, so we became part of Prestige Cruise Holding.
And at that point, you were back working for Frank Del Rio, which was interesting, the two of you. So that's incredible.
And he and I had clashed in the younger parts of our career, but we got along pretty well. And again, we had great success together because I learned a lot from Frank about marketing to fill versus just trying to manage everything within a tight budget. And so what happened, Frank really helped us increase the occupancy, and I think I really helped them increase the rate. So it worked out really well together, and we started making some real money.
Yeah, and that was a great marriage at that point. And then, of course, Prestige, which was Oceania and Regent, ended up merging with Norwegian Cruise Line.
Because Apollo Capital they bought NCL before they bought us, and so they wanted to monetize their investment. So they combined the three companies together, and again, Frank was going to leave, but then he ended up taking over when Kevin Sheehan left. So
that's right. So then, when did you leave Regent, and what happened then?
Well, it was just before 2015, 14, I think. Frank wanted and the finance guys wanted to bring somebody else in, so they brought a guy in, and there wasn't room for me, so I was given a nice package to go home, and I took a 2-year non-compete garden. They call it a garden leave.
I remember seeing you. You were like on one of the large Royal Caribbean ships once, and I was like, "What are you or going to Clea? What are you doing here?" Yeah.
Well, I just wouldn't want people to make sure they didn't know I died or didn't know I didn't die.
You were still out in the industry, I got to tell you.
Exactly. So, and then what happened was I started consulting again, and I did a project for Silver Sea because they weren't doing well at the time, and I kind of gave them what I wanted to do, and Manfredi and Roberto Martinoli was on the board at the time, said, go ahead and do it. So we did, and then within a year, we had Silver Sea heading in the right direction. Again, all about the right team. I think the key to my success and the success that these companies have had, and all successful companies, it's the team you put together. One person can't do it. You've got to have the right people in the right spot, all pulling in the same direction.
Absolutely. So eventually, about a year and a half ago, you left, you retired, left Silver Sea, and everybody was like, "I can't believe Mark's not going to be around."
Yeah. Well, I have to say, the one thing I love Silver Sea, and it was great working. I'd worked, I'd worked at NCL already. I'd worked for obviously Royal Viking Line. And I finally got a chance to work with Royal Caribbean, and I was very impressed by everything they do. But I also didn't like driving to the port every day from Fort Lauderdale. That 3 hours or 4 hours of round trip was a long
in the traffic, right?
And so they were very generous to me again. I had a great time there, and we're still friendly. And I've started doing some consulting projects, trying to help people find those little areas where you can make a difference. And in our business, those last 3 or 4% occupancy really makes a difference. The next $10 or $15 per person per day. And then last but not least, it all starts with how happy is the customer? How do you keep that customer happy? And again, Royal was amazing, and Frank was amazing of making sure that we always reinvested money in the ships to make sure they were pristine, so that people felt like nobody had been in that room before you got there. So,
also you were famous also for having great relations with the travel agency community as well.
Yeah, and rightfully so. I always joke, and we had some issues, I think you remember at Silver Sea, where our direct guys had gotten out a lot of line before I got there, and I kind of reined them in. And the issue was I kept trying to explain to people, we had 3 sets of customers. We've got our stakeholders, or the people that are investing the money in the ships themselves. Then we've got our passengers who pay our salaries, they pay our travel partner salaries. And then we've got our travel agent partners, because over half the business comes from travel agents, And, they don't have to sell me. They can sell anybody. And customers, particularly if they haven't sailed with you before, they want to be able to not waste their money, but not waste their time on a product they're not going to like. Sure. So the travel agent's risking their best client by introducing them to us. And then last but not least is your employees, because your employees at the end of the day deliver that experience for the person that's paying the bill. So it's a perfect circle if it works well.
Well, if you remember, after you left Renaissance tried to do a direct strategy, and it didn't work, and travel agents weren't happy. And then Frank had to come back and try to get them back in the fold, but it was too late.
Well, yeah, the problem was that I understood his frustration because Frank had a tour operator mentality. So, he wanted to do the charter flights on Wednesday. And so you could travel any day you wanted as long as it was Wednesday. And of course, the travel agent's customer would say, I want to go on Tuesday, or I want to go on Monday or Thursday. And of course, they were fighting internally with us, didn't want to take our charter flights. And again, Frank would say, well, you can go any day you want as long as it's Wednesday. So I think he got up, he did a direct mail campaign, which actually worked really well, but you could never expand it fast enough in order to fill the ships. I used to say to him, and he and I are good friends today, I said, if you think this strategy would have worked, do you think Carnival wouldn't have done it a long time ago?
Yeah, well, they were always very travel agent specific. Yeah. They sold. Bob Dickinson in his day was really purely through the trade.
Well, yeah, the beauty of the travel advisor is that, first of all, they're, again, trusting you with their most important customers, and you don't pay them anything until they sell something. Where if I got a direct team, I got to give them a base salary, I got to give them a place to stay, I got to give them a telephone, I got to give them a computer, all that costs add up. So you don't make a lot more money taking a direct booking. The difference is you control the process better, and you, of course, never lose sight of that lead either. But at the end of the day, it's a partnership, and there's plenty of business out there for both travel advisors and for the company together. And the one thing we try never to do is compete with them. It's an even playing field, and that was the rule.
Yeah. Well, take us back to the very beginning. What are some of the biggest changes you've seen in cruising since you during your career? And your career has spanned really pretty much the beginnings of cruises, maybe not the absolute beginning, but you were back with the NCL and Carnival days, and then here you are, in all this, the way the tonnage, the ships have changed. What are some of the biggest things that you see as the differences?
Well, when I started, there were 500,000 cruise passengers in the whole world, because the transatlantic had just kind of died and was just getting restarted. Carnival and NCL were splitting, so that was there. So it was an opportunity to get in on the ground floor. And my dad always said, it's really good to be good, but it's even better to be lucky. And I was lucky enough to be in that time when the market really started growing. I think the things were about it was the focus. Initially, it was pretty much focused around the Caribbean. I mean, there were operators in Europe, but they were pretty much catering to Europeans.
Well, it used to be called Norwegian Caribbean Line, right?
Right. And then Alaska kind of took off, and cruises got a little longer. The repeat factor came pretty well. The value of cruising has always been there, and it continues to even be better than it was those days. Give you an idea, back in 74, we were charging $1,400 per person for a 7-day cruise in a cabin that was so small you could touch both walls by standing in the middle. And on a nice 7-day cruise. And by the way, it wasn't inclusive, although drinks cost 35 cents in those days. And of course, it did include the food, and it was a good value. But the value proposition, it used to be it was the destinations we're going to. And destinations are still very important. One of the reasons that transatlantic cruises don't sell as well as destinational cruises. But the ships themselves have become more important with all the different dining venues and innovative people like my friend Christian Salo and Robin Lindsay and some of those people, where they introduced alternative dining. The chef now that is at Explorer Journeys, he helped us really create some initial amazing menus at some of the places.
And I know him. I was on one of the first Explorer Journeys cruise, and he actually cooked for us one night.
And Frank bringing in Paul Bocuse and having him work with his chefs to create a deliverable product. We had a Michelin star restaurant. Christian did the first alternative dining. We had if you remember, that Italian restaurant, the Diamond. People would fight to get into the place, and it was amazing. And the food cost was good too, because pasta's not particularly expensive to make. But people just loved it. So it's that creating that additional atmosphere to make it worthwhile. And I think even today, people ask me, cruising has gotten more expensive. But I said, have you looked at what it costs to stay in a luxury hotel in Europe right now, or even in the United States? 700, 800 euros a night, and that doesn't even include your 35-euro breakfast. Right. So if you look at what a cruise costs, the good use of your time while you're on it cruise is still an amazing value, and the guest satisfaction is so high. Over 50% of the people on almost every luxury ship, and even the mass market ships, are repeaters. Look at Royal Caribbean, how well they're doing, but it's because they're delivering this really unique experience on board the ship, and also calling in some pretty cool places, including their own islands. So it's about that whole thing about innovation. I think has been going on, and we've been forced to innovate as a business, and it's paid off.
Well, on that note, all these new private islands that all of the lines have created they didn't exist back then.
NCL actually had the first one. It was on a 3 and 4 day cruise. We brought the Sunward 2. We bought one of the old Cunard ships and turned it into a Sunward 2. And that was always the hit port. And by the way, making a lot of money on it too, because people love to spend money when they're on vacation. And where else can you do that? I mean, it was such a wonderful time. The inventiveness of the people that have run through this industry is amazing. You mentioned Bob before, Richard Fain.
Richard Fain,
Canute Kloster himself, Ted Harrison, Mickey Harrison. A lot of brilliant people have been in this industry. And I was fortunate enough to be around to not be in the thick of it, but be on around the edges.
I think you were in the thick of it. I
was the third generation of it, baby. But I learned a lot from. One of the things that's important is they also trusted you. If you were successful, they let you do stuff. Although sometimes I did stuff and thought it was always better to ask for forgiveness than permission to get it done.
So you did it. You went ahead and did it, and then see what happens. Yeah, exactly. But most of the time, I guess it worked out.
Yeah, most of the time. Not always, but most of the time, for sure. Yeah.
What do you think the future holds for cruising?
I think it's great. We just can't take advantage. We can't take it for granted. I think we can't take it for granted that the customer's just going to show up. We got to keep impressing them. We've got to make sure we're welcomed in the places we go. And that's by being a good citizen. It's by meeting with them before the season starts and find out what the destination's expectation is. Mm-hmm. So you got to really work on it. And you got to make sure you get the right people in the right place again. All these systems are wonderful, and it's so much easier to take a booking than it was back in those days. But the bookings are much more complicated now. It used to be, every Friday or Monday out of Miami, or every Saturday or Sunday out of Miami. Now you get 300 different itineraries, 400 ports of call, 500
a lot more home ports too.
Yeah, and a lot of unique destinations we're visiting. Plus, you got to tour. If you want people to go, you got to help them get the air, because that's a pain in the neck. You got to help them get land before and after. You got to make sure that when they're in the port, they're not just sitting around taking a motor coach tour. Most of the people, particularly in the high end of the market, they don't want to be tourists. They want to be travelers. They want to see stuff that the average person's not going to see, or stuff they've heard about that they haven't had a chance to see themselves.
Yeah, well, it's
innovation again.
And innovation in itineraries. Well, as you said, innovation in food, innovation in onboard experiences. It really has. I've been around not quite as long. Just you got arrived about a decade before I did, but in that time that I've been around, it's changed so much since 1990.
The other thing that we've had to do, and I think it's been amazing, is the ability to recruit onboard personnel. And they are our secret sauce. They typically, no matter where they're from, if they buy into the culture of the company, they are really dedicated to it. And of course, they enjoy their life making people happy. You can do a job that if it's just a job, it's just a job. Where when you're on the ship, if you're not having a good time, you shouldn't work on a ship, because it's 24/7, 365 days, or at least 180 days a year, depending how long your contract is. So you might as well have fun while you're doing it. And I think you'll see that the crew really enjoys themselves, and they get real satisfaction out of seeing those smiling faces.
Yeah, and it has, all the crews are great, and it's due to the training they get and the onboard experience. It makes it even that much better. So, what's the future hold for you? You're just keep doing some consulting and then stay putting your hand in, or what?
Well, I kind of joke around. I've looked at a lot of projects. A lot of them, have a sweat equity deal. When I look at their numbers, there's a lot of sweat and not much equity. So, I'd like to have somebody that I think I can help in a near term and help grow the business more, and again stay involved in it, because it's such a fascinating business. And the other thing that I truly believe is that travel is the best cause for peace. When you meet people, it's really hard to hate them. Because people say, "Oh, you go to Turkey?" I say, "Yeah, one of my best friends is from Turkey. Yeah. It's an amazing place." You go to China. I've got some friends in China that are just great people.
Well, I just got off a cruise that were Chinese and Russians in the same cruise, and it was just amazing, and everybody got along.
Oh, for sure. And it really opens the world up, and it kind of allows you to take some of the filters away from what people hear or see. Because, you'll hear stories that may or may not be true, but they're there. And to see the real world, and see, people living and enjoying their life on a daily basis is really important. And remember, you see all that stuff and read it in books and you watch it on the movies, but when you actually go and see some of these places, it just opens your eyes.
Absolutely. Well, Mark, I want to thank you for spending the time. I wanted to do this interview for a while, give you we've spent a lot of time together over the years, good friend, and really you opened my eyes to what cruising was. And I hope don't be a stranger, okay? Because
I'm not planning on it. So
you and I got to compare grandchildren photos.
There you go. That's for sure. But again, I just think that this is a business, and if you're lucky enough to be in it, either as a employee, as a shareholder, as a travel advisor or travel agency owner, or a customer,
or a travel journalist,
enjoy it, because it's kind of about the most fun you'll have making money.
I absolutely agree. I've been in it now 30 plus years, and you were in it for your entire career, and you touched so many bases along the way with people who were, really part of cruising. And be honest with you, you really were a major part of this industry.
Well,
and still are. Right?
I learned a lot from a lot of great people like Bob and like Canute and all those other people. So it's been fortunate that I've been around, and I hope I've helped other people learn how to do the business too, which is really important to give back to them.
Well, I know the opinion travel advisors have of you. You definitely did that, and it really, and you're still doing it really just by being you and being out there.
Well, thanks a lot, James. I appreciate it. And you be well, huh?
I will be. We'll talk some more. I'm James Shillinglaw, and this is Insider Travel Report.